The candles had burned low in the palace chamber when Carlos's trembling fingers finally stopped moving across the manuscript. The ink was still wet, not just black, but crimson, as if the very notes themselves had been written in blood. By morning, the Prince of Venosa would be known throughout Italy not just as a musical genius, but as a man who had turned his own home into a theater of murder. The question that haunted him for the rest of his days echoed through every composition he would ever write. Was it love that drove him to kill, or madness? This is the story of how jealousy and genius collided in the most deadly way imaginable. Picture the cobblestone streets of Naples as the sun sets behind Mount Vesuvius. The air is thick with the scent of orange blossoms and the sounds of church bells. But inside one particular palace, the atmosphere is suffocating with suspicion. Carlo Gesualdo paces his study, his noble hands stained with ink from hours of composing. At just 24, he's already creating music that sounds like it belongs in another century. Wild, passionate, revolutionary. But tonight, his mind isn't on melodies. It's on his wife, Maria, the kind of woman who can make poets weep and kings go to war. She's beautiful, yes, but beauty in Renaissance Italy can be as dangerous as it is alluring. And Maria? She's already buried 2 husbands. "Where is she?" Carlo whispers to the shadows, his voice carrying a tremor that has nothing to do with the evening chill. What he doesn't know yet is that love letters are already being passed in secret, and the betrayal he fears most is unfolding right under his nose. The marriage had begun like a fairy tale. Maria Diavlos glided down the cathedral aisle in silk that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime, her dark eyes sparkling with what everyone assumed was love. Carlo waited at the altar, his heart hammering against his chest as he whispered his vows. But fairy tales don't prepare you for the whispers that follow a woman who's been widowed twice before her 25th birthday. "Cursed," the servants murmured. "Unlucky in love." Carlo tried to ignore them, but doubt has a way of growing in the dark corners of a noble man's mind. Music became his refuge. In his private chamber, surrounded by the scratch of a quill on parchment and the soft glow of candles, Carlo poured his soul into compositions that no one else could understand. The harmonies were strange, beautiful, but somehow unsettling. "You spend more time with your music than me," Maria had said just last week, her voice carrying a hurt that made Carlos's chest tighten. But when he looked up from his manuscripts, she was already gone. Again. What Carlo didn't know was that Maria had found solace of her own. In the flickering candlelight of her private chamber, she pressed her quill to parchment and wrote words that would have made her husband's blood run cold. "My dearest Fabrizio, I count the hours until we can be together again." Fabrizio Carafa, the Duke of Andria, was everything Carlo wasn't. Young, reckless, and utterly without fear. When he smiled at Maria across crowded ballrooms, the very air seemed to crackle with forbidden desire. But in Renaissance Italy, some desires were worth killing for. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning when Carlo caught his wife burning papers in the fireplace. "Just old poetry," she said, but her hands were shaking. Carlo nodded and said nothing, but his composer's ear, trained to catch the slightest discord, detected the lie in her voice. From that moment, Carlo Gesualdo became a hunter in his own home. He memorized the patterns of Maria's movements, the times she claimed to visit friends, the servants who seemed to avoid his eyes. "Trust," he muttered to himself during sleepless nights, "is a luxury princes cannot afford." The evidence came in pieces. A servant's nervous glance, a horse that returned sweating from a supposedly leisurely ride, love letters hidden behind loose stones in the garden wall. Each discovery felt like a knife turning in Carlos's chest. When he finally found the cache of letters, Carlos's hands trembled as he read Fabrizio's passionate words to his wife. "When the moon is full," one letter promised, "I will come to you, and nothing in heaven or earth will keep us apart." Carlo crushed the parchment paper in his fist and whispered, "We shall see about that." The plan came to him like a dark melody, complex, precise, and utterly devastating. "I'm going hunting," Carlo announced to his household, making sure everyone heard. 3 days in the mountains, the palace will be quiet without me." But as he rode away with his men, Carlo was already counting the hours until his return. What his wife didn't know was that her husband had doubled back, leaving his hunting party with orders to continue without him. Now, he waited in the shadows of his own home, patient as death itself. The trap was set, and all he needed was for his prey to walk into it. The night air was thick with the scent of jasmine when Fabrizio Carafa finally came. He moved through the palace gardens like a man drunk on desire, completely unaware that every step was being watched by eyes filled with murderous intent. "Maria," he whispered to the darkness, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. The Duke of Andria had never learned that some husbands were more dangerous than others. Tonight, that ignorance would cost him everything. Inside the chamber, Maria waited by candlelight, her heart racing with the thrill of forbidden love. "He said he would come," she whispered to herself, smoothing her silk nightgown. "He promised." But promises, like hearts, are easily broken. In the depths of the palace, Carlo gathered his 3 most loyal servants, men who had served his family for decades and would die before betraying their master. "Remember," he told them, his voice steady as stone, "we are not murderers tonight. We are instruments of justice." The footsteps on the marble stairs sounded like a funeral march as Carlo and his men made their way toward the chamber where his wife waited for her lover. Each step brought them closer to a moment that would change everything, and there would be no turning back. The door stood between Carlo and the truth he'd been dreading. Behind that carved wood, he could hear whisper endearments, soft laughter, and the rustle of silk against skin. His hand found the handle, and for one last moment he hesitated. Then he remembered the letters, the lies, the betrayal, and kicked the door open. The lovers froze like actors caught in a play they'd never meant to perform. Maria's scream died in her throat as she saw her husband silhouetted in the doorway, sword in hand. Fabrizio reached for his own blade, but it was too late. The dance of death had already begun. "You were supposed to be hunting," Maria gasped, her voice breaking. Carlos's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "I was," he replied, raising his sword, "and I found exactly what I was looking for." What happened next was not justice. It was savagery dressed in the clothes of honor. Carlo and his servants didn't simply kill the lovers, they obliterated them, their blades rising and falling with the rhythm of a madman's song. When it was over, the room looked like a slaughterhouse. But Carlo wasn't finished. As dawn broke over Naples, the people of the city awoke to a sight that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The mutilated bodies of Maria Diablos and Fabrizio Carafa lay displayed on the palace steps like hunting trophies, a public declaration of a husband's terrible revenge. The message was clear. This was what happened to those who betrayed the Prince of Venosa. But the whispers that followed spoke of something even more horrible, that Carlo had also murdered his own infant son, convinced the child belonged to another man. The composer had become a monster, and there was no music beautiful enough to wash the blood from his hands. The strangest part of Carlos's story isn't that he killed his wife and her lover. It's that he got away with it. Renaissance law was clear. A husband who caught his wife in adultery had the right to kill both parties. The courts declared it justifiable homicide, and Carlo Gesualdo walked free. But freedom and absolution are two very different things. In the weeks that followed, Carlo found himself haunted by sounds that weren't there. Maria's laughter echoing through empty halls. Fabrizio's voice calling his name in the darkness. "What have I become?" he whispered to his reflection. But the mirror offered no answers. Then something extraordinary happened. Carlo began to compose again, but the music that poured from his tortured soul was unlike anything the world had ever heard. The harmonies were jarring, discordant, beautiful in their strangeness. It was as if his guilt had given birth to genius. "Listen," he would tell visitors, his eyes wild with fervor. "Can you hear it? The music of madness, the song of a damned soul." His compositions were centuries ahead of their time, so advanced that they wouldn't be fully understood until the 1900s. But those who heard them swore they could feel the composer's anguish in every note. Carlos's guilt manifested in other ways too. He hired young men to beat him daily, believing that physical pain could somehow balance the scales of his spiritual torment. His servants would find him in the early hours, bruised and bleeding, muttering prayers that sounded more like curses. When he remarried, his new wife lived in constant terror. "He stares at me like he's seeing ghosts," she confided to her sister. "Sometimes I wake to find him standing over my bed, just watching." The Prince of Venosa had become a legend, but legends can be more terrifying than men. The murder of Maria Diavlos became the scandal of the century, whispered about in courts from Rome to Paris. But what fascinated historians wasn't just the crime. It was the way Carlos's music changed afterwards, as if murder had unlocked some terrible creative power. Today, musicologists study Gesualdo's compositions like forensic evidence from a crime scene. "You can hear the exact moment his sanity broke," one scholar noted. "The harmony literally fractures, like a mind coming apart at the seams." Psychologists have their own theories about the maniacal musician prince. Some call him a psychopath who used Renaissance customs to justify his bloodlust. Others see him as a tortured artist whose guilt transformed him into a revolutionary composer. But everyone agrees on one thing: Carlo Gesualdo was very dangerous to love. Carlo Gesualdo died alone in his palace, surrounded by the ghosts of his victims and the revolutionary music born from his guilt. His final composition, written just days before his death, was titled Miserere me, have mercy on me. It was a prayer that would never be answered. But here's the strangest twist in this tale of love, murder, and madness. The music Carlo created in his guilt and anguish has outlived him by 4 centuries. Every time you hear a dissonant chord in a horror movie, every time a composer uses harmony to create unease, you're hearing the echo of a Renaissance prince's tormented soul. The question that haunts us today is the same one that drove Carlo to murder. Can we separate the art from the artist? When we listen to music born from bloodshed, are we appreciating genius or celebrating a killer? The answer, like Gesualdo's harmonies, is beautifully terrifyingly complex. What do you think? Was Carlo Gesualdo a tortured genius or a cold-blooded killer who happened to compose beautiful music? Can artistic brilliance excuse monstrous behavior? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this journey into the dark heart of Renaissance Italy fascinated you, hit that like button, subscribe to Crimes of the Crown, and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we're investigating next. Until next time, remember, in the corridors of power, the most beautiful songs are sometimes written in blood.